No, it was really helpful. I remember like I was so overwhelmed that I'd be like, when I do my monthly newsletter, I would be like, go look at Yola's Google Doc. Like I just like send people to your thing because I was like, I don't have time. I'm freelancing 100 jobs. So let's talk about examples from your work or others' works that you admire where comedy has either been a more effective tool than traditional organizing methods to motivate people to take action, or you made activism more accessible to a comedy community or audience. And I frame it this way because like Yola and I come from the comedy side and are, sometimes cosplay as activists. Like we're trying to, figure out how to be more supportive as comedians in this community. And Ivy and Ben come from the organizing side, and you have that background and knowledge and history of working in the field, and then now starting to use your comedy as a way to make things more accessible for different audiences. So I want to hear like how you've used it from your different ways in, and how it's been more effective than in your previous roles.
I can start. Yeah. So for the Texas Bowl, you are actually welcome to become a writer. Let's talk after. But I found myself going to the Creek in the Cave comedy club a lot during the pandemic. It's just walking distance to my apartment, sorry. But when we had the idea for the Texas Bowl, I was like, well, we need headline writers, and I don't really know any comedians. So I just went up to someone after a show and said, hey, would you be interested in doing this? And they're like, well, I don't really know a lot about politics. And I'm like, neither do the people legislating, so it's fine. And I do, but in all seriousness, I think that's a major part of it. I think the comics who were not particularly political were like, well, I want to get it right. I want to get the policy right. And I think if you've done this long enough, you sort of understand, like, it would be nice if that was really what it was about. Unfortunately, it's not most of the time. And so it's really about helping them realize that, like, if you're a good person and you're using common sense, generally you know what's going on, and you should feel confident in your voice and in your sense of humor to communicate that to other folks who sort of come at it with your amount of perspective and context. So that's the immediate example I can think of. But.
You can't talk about a comedy club that way, Yola. What if you ever want a spot at that comedy club? What if... For me, it goes, but I feel like skill sets from organizing have worked really well in the arts and comedy. And then comedy also actually, like, it's not like I quit my job and then I became funny. Do you know what I mean? Like, I've always been a riot. Okay. I'm a raging bisexual Asian American woman with ADHD. Okay, so like, can I hear? Okay, POC, LGBTQ plus with ADHD. Yeah.
All the acronyms.
Let me hear it. Okay, right. So I have been hysterical my entire life. And so, for example, I still do periodically, when I testify at city council, or if I testify at the Texas State Legislature on an issue with some organization, or sometimes just kind of my own accord as an Asian mom about town who has her concerns about gentrification. Sometimes I will literally be the only person on my side of an issue in an entire room, right? Because it's always the people with all this time on their hands that are like, no, I don't want a bus stop on my street, like, I could tell you so many stories, okay? Sometimes I will literally be the only person that signed up to speak on my side of an issue. But because I am so much more entertaining than them, mine is the only quote that makes it in the evening news. Do you know what I mean? Okay. So humor is effective kind of, on all sides. And I want to push back. So what you said, Ben, about like the right is using media like better than us, or culture better than us. I had several people say that to me tonight. And that, I disagree with that. I think that the reason why the other side is investing so heavily in culture like building their own mainstream television networks and things like that. They've invested so much is because we are so good at it almost effortlessly. Like sometimes we're not even trying to be that good at it, and we are so good at it because all the funny gays are on our side. Do you know what I mean? Right? They've got the, well, you know who they've got. They've got
Gutfield, please.
You know, all right.
Gutfield.
I mean, there are definitely some gays over there that I'm like, y'all are sleeper cell agents because you are trolling. Like, you have to be trolling on their side, and I can't wait for somebody to say like the code word, like pumpkin spice, and they're just like, staying into action. They're like, every hole's legal now. Okay, out of nowhere. No. So that's how sometimes humor would be more effective when I was on the organizing side, right? But also, humor is really effective when I was in the business of recruiting, right? So early in your career as an activist, a lot of your job is recruiting people, and it doesn't matter if they start out agreeing with you or not. Your job is to find common ground and kind of and start to help them develop their political identity, and hopefully, and hopefully, if your cause is just, most people, when they think about it hard enough, will end up in your camp, and then you can start to build community power, right? So community organizing from this perspective, for community organizing for liberation is a slow process, right? It's artisanal change, right? Because the easy stuff is a very fascist, structurally fascist, right? It's like top down, do what I say, kind of power. And people who don't have formal power, doesn't mean they don't have power, right? But people who don't have formal power have other kinds of power. Power in numbers, power in persuasion, power in information, power in community ties. There's lots of other ways to have power. There's the entire universe. There's no like trump card, everything is like 10,000 games of rock, paper, scissors. That's what power struggles are, is you're just playing rock, paper, scissors, and you need to understand which one of those things that you are, right? So in that kind of organizing, I used humor a lot to bridge and open up really uncomfortable discussions, right? Like, people are really scared to talk about race, but then when the minority in the room makes a really racist joke, everybody, which I make so many racist jokes, Megan knows.
Grade A racist right here.
I literally, I went up to 5 different white men and be like, oh my God, Ben, before I was like, oh my God, Ben. And I was like, oh, and none of them were Ben. To your credit, one of them humored me and was super polite about it for like 20 minutes before he was like, I'm actually someone else. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. You should just be on our panel. But he declined. He did not decide to take up the space. Thank you very much.
And
then he took a picture. And then he took an Instagram picture for us. So yeah, if you want a job.
This is a safe space.
Okay. Thank you for your service. And it made it very effective because, like what you were saying, where people, when they don't have the, there's just such kind of in general media, there is such a surface level discussion of a lot of these issues, so that like once they kind of get past like the shallow end of the pool, people get super uncomfortable. Even comics, right, get super uncomfortable, don't want to talk about it because they feel like they don't know. And humor is just a way to just kind of take that tension out of the air and be like, no, well, now you represent your race. Go ahead. Like this is like, let's go. Let's just get it all out there, so that's what I think humor helped me so much in the organizing space, or to be able to speak truth to power, like that helped a lot when I'm like literally in rooms full of power, right? Like to be able to make a point quickly when I have the least amount of time of anybody to speak, Now, organizing here in comedy, the reason why I find this over here, but now I'm not in the recruiting part of my activist pipeline any longer. It is very, which is good. Whew, you go gray real fast doing that kind of work. You kind of advance, and then kind of new activists like kind of get into that job, right? And then now you're kind of, then you move along in your career, and then you're more like strategizing about power itself and things like that. So I'm not doing that work anymore. And then, but doing this work, so everybody is so traumatized, and trauma shapes you in the way that you communicate and the way that you can relate to other people. And so a lot of times, sometimes when you're organizing, the most frustrating thing is not your opposition, but your allies, right? Like having like, or like doing coalitions, right? Like for example, LGBTQIA+ is not one identity. It is a political identity. It's a political coalition of people that say, together we are stronger than we are apart, and that we are committing to helping each other advance our issues, even if that specific issue isn't specific to me, right? And not that it's a perfect coalition, not that it's perfectly intersectional or anything, but just to kind of explain like what some of these coalitions do, and that maybe you have witnessed infighting across like the letters or like whatever. Well, that happens in every kind of coalition, right? When teachers and organized labor organizes, auto workers have different issues than nurses, for example. It's like they have one has gender pay disparity, one has geography or something like that, and they start infighting with each other, and then they start splitting off, and then we start diminishing our own power. Well, with comedy, right, and then we start to split off like the Christians do. Like every time they're like, oh my God, this is the book, this is not real. Oh, new church, right? Like every time they just bop, 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 bop. And they wonder why nobody's going to church. Like you keep dividing your power. It's like totally ridiculous. Anyway, I'm not a Christian. I don't have a dog in that fight. I just think it's foolish. Because I'm an organizer, right? So now I am bringing organizing ability over into comedy because I'm coming from organizing. So like for example, I had to negotiate a deal with Spotify. Okay. Is this being recorded? Because I have.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
I just remember that now.
Okay, because I do have a non-disparagement clause in my contract. So, so let's pretend that you are negotiating a contract as an individual artist with a big corporate entity during, I don't know, late stage capitalism. And there is a tendency in free market economics is that you want to buy low and sell high, so to speak. And so they're going to tell creators like Yola, like Megan, that you should be lucky to even be here, right? Because like we are holding all the keys to the kingdom, and you should just even be lucky to be here. You should be lucky. You just be grateful that you survived the Hunger Games of that contest where we were like, where they all had to fight to the death, and the one that lived got to be like the one minority book we published this year in our DEI program. And there was that. I saw that was a perspective that was being reflected to me from a lot of organizations that were a lot more, at least on paper and at least in their net worth, a lot more powerful than me. And they were like, you should be lucky to be here. We're not going to negotiate. A lot of people said that. And I said, oh, well, my family's Vietnamese. Negotiating is literally one of my favorite things to do. I negotiate at TJ Maxx, at Nordstrom. I don't pay full price for anything. The little tuk-tuks that go downtown here. Do you know what I'm talking? What are they called? What are they called in English? Pedicabs? Yeah. You're no, okay. I negotiate for the fun of it. Then I tip them crazy because I'm pro-labor. Anyway, every single person that I walked away from a negotiation from came back. And do you know why? Is it my charm? Yeah. It is because they want you to think that you are a dime a dozen, okay? But artists with compelling voices and good ideas that audiences like, who can actually execute on them, who are telling stories that have not been told before, are not a dime a dozen. A little bit because we're special, but a little bit because they never let us tell our stories before. A little bit their fault, right? A little bit your fault that you're having to pay extra for this, right? And if your CEO is like, you have to make 1,000 podcast deals this year, you can't afford to just walk away from the negotiating table with that artist if that artist stands firm. And the thing that I was standing firm for was not representation, because we have plenty of people who are working on representation, and we are making progress on representation. But media is a power structure. Media is a power structure, and all of the power structures that we are living under right now are white supremacist patriarchal power structures. And therefore, I am using my artistic capital, my creative capital, right? This voice that I protected after, gosh, how many years of public school telling me that the way I talk is wrong, the way I tell stories in the wrong order, my words are not literary enough or whatever, right? And then only to move to Austin, Texas, where a bunch of white dudes running improv theaters want to charge me hundreds of dollars per course to teach me back the thing that I have been doing my entire life, because everyone in my community talks like that. Everyone in my community is hilarious. Everyone in where I'm from, I'm from the hood. I'm from the hood in Dallas, Texas. And right, like that's literally just where I'm from, behind the Hong Kong supermarket on one side and the Forest Lane, like not the good part of Forest Lane, Dallas, Texas on the other side, okay? That's where I'm from. Everybody where I'm from tells stories in the funniest order. And then you go to school and your white teachers are like, no, you're supposed to tell stories in chronological order or right to left or like whatever, right? And then you get to improv and white guys who did mushrooms one time are like, actually, you can make other choices, you know? And then they gatekeep with all this vocabulary because that's the only way they knew how to learn it. They're like, oh, I learned about feelings and I put a word on it. You know, I learned about this structure where you tell things in the funniest order and now it's called a herald or whatever, right? And we're going to charge you hundreds of dollars to learn it. And if you don't like the culture here, the sticky-fingered culture here, well, then you don't, yeah. And a lot of people accept these no's from people. A lot of people would say, well, I never got to the negotiating table, or I did feel lucky, so I did just say yes, even though it made me a little bit uncomfortable. And that does nothing for, that is, you came with power, and then you didn't use it to change the media structure. So I held strong because I knew, since everybody else had also taken my call, had also taken my meeting, and also come back to the table, I knew that I had more power than they were trying to express to me that I had. And I used it to make structural change. I used it to set the deals differently for the other women of color in the accelerator program, to make sure that the composer and the producers and the other people who weren't the on mic talent, the representation, you know, were able to keep their intellectual property rights and things like that. Because music, so podcast deals, a lot of them are based on music deals, and the music industry is, I mean, most of art, but famously the music industry is made on the exploitation of people of color and their cultural assets, right? So it is based on exploitation. And so and it's not that I want everybody who does business with me to prosper, but in order to do that, so that it's everyone prospers instead of some people are exploited and some of those people benefit from that exploitation, right? That there is a way to make it so that everybody prospers, and I had to use that, and it was so awkward because when you are Asian, in particular, my ethnic group, representation for representation's sake, with nothing else attached to it, is actually often used to entrench white supremacy. It's used as being like, look, we got one of them.
I'm the token Arab.
Right. We got one, which means we must be good. We must be fine, and we don't need to change anything else. We don't need to go. The theory of change from capitalism is always, well, they just don't have the education and work ethic that us rich people have, you know. That must be it. So we're gonna, instead of training programs for your gatekeepers to recognize their bias, we're gonna have training programs where people of color have to compete, or women or whatever, right, have to compete to have a little bit of a slot.